Hi, baddies. Welcome back to another episode of Tara's Baddies Club. I'm excited to be back. It's been a moment. I had to take a moment to get my other projects together, and I'm so excited to help other survivors start to tell their stories, producing, doing all that good stuff. And I have been watching dogs, and I also was sick. So when you're sick, you feel like you don't have the best podcasting voice, and you really don't. There's all that interesting things in your system. So I am back. I'm going to try to be better about putting episodes out, but if they don't come out, just know I'm doing other stuff and always check in with me on Instagram. The podcast course has been going. It's been rocking and rolling, and you could really join anytime still. You could join anytime, but the last two lives are these couple weeks. So I'm excited for the podcast course to come to a close with the lives, but there's still time to join. And then if you have heard, October month was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and that's why we had the episode with Sean come out that month. And then we are still getting together the DV baskets and the DV bags for survivors. One of the bags is going to the survivor who didn't get help from an organization that I was going to donate to. And then she has two boys. So I'm doing one bag for her and then one bag for her two boys. And then the rest is going to go hopefully to the District of Attorney of LA, and they're going to spread them out there. So let's get into this episode. I have my friend on, Hollywood Wade. He's going to talk about how he defended himself in self-defense. And it's quite a story because he ended up taking a life. And that's something I can really relate to with him on. So let's welcome Hollywood Wade. Hi, Wade. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you because I was on your show and I didn't know your story. And then you started telling me a little bit about it. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I can relate to you in so many aspects. So I'm so excited for everyone to know who you are. And so for the people that don't know you, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, I go by Hollywood Wade. My name's Wade Williamson, and I run the Crime and Entertainment podcast. I've been going for about 3 years now. And the reason this whole podcast came about and the reason I do this is because I actually wound up being charged with murder and possession of a weapon during a violent crime, even though all the evidence and everything was clear that it was self-defense. Overzealous, newly promoted detective looking to, I think, advance her career, charged me with murder. And basically I was fired from my job. I was arrested, had to obtain a lawyer. It basically just was pure hell. And it drug on for right at 5 years until it was finally dropped. And around about, I'd say this happened in 2018. I'd say around 2020 when COVID happened, I just decided to start a podcast. I think a lot of the world decided to start a podcast around that time. And I wanted to do true crime, but then I was like, there's so many good ones and like so many good ones that just go deep with information. And I didn't know how well I would be, at that because I didn't know anything about it. And so I was like, well, I want to talk about some other stuff. And a buddy of mine who's done this before was like, so you want to do crime and entertainment? And I'm like, yeah, that's actually a pretty good name. And so I took the name and rolled with it and just started doing interviews. And it very much kind of became my therapy way to, kind of escape what was going on in my head mentally. I'm a very outgoing person. I love talking to people. And I was on house arrest this entire time. So I couldn't go out. I couldn't go, to the store, to the bar, wherever, just to meet people and conversate. I wasn't allowed that. So the podcast really became an outlet to be able to express myself. I got better at it. As I went along, upgraded cameras, upgraded mics. You kind of learn as you go. Just recently, as of a few months ago, I went back and revamped like all 380 something thumbnails that I'd done just to make them a little better because the ones I had before wasn't really good. And even when the case eventually did get dropped, I still kept with the podcast because now I actually really do enjoy it. And I've gotten to meet, many great people like yourself who has very inspirational stories. I wouldn't say everybody I've interviewed has an inspirational story, but there are definitely some sprinkled in the mix.
Love that so much. And your podcast is definitely, you've had on Ashley Hoff, who was on Survivor Squad,
Mhm.
and you've had on a lot of different also mafia people.
Yes. I was always kind of interested in that whole like facet. I was a fan of, obviously the Goodfellas, Casino, The Godfather, Sopranos when it was on TV was like, that you had church in the morning and Sopranos in the evening. It was right up there with church. It was my favorite show. And I've gotten to interview like probably 7 or 8 people that were in that show. So that's been really cool. And then I started reaching out to some of the guys that did most of them cooperated in some facet or another, and kind of got into that life. And I've interviewed a ton of those guys, and most of them have they've either done their time and got out, or they whatever deal they cut. But I would say 99% of them are trying to do right now. One of them has like Anthony Ruggiano Jr., who's a good friend of mine. He has a drug rehab thing that he does to try to help people get off drugs, because he himself was addicted for a while. That's why he never rose up in the ranks, because of his drug addiction. A lot of people just trying to tell kids, look, this is no kind of life. Like, did we have fun? Yeah, but it was, you're worrying about going to jail every day. You're worrying about getting arrested every day. You're worrying about getting killed every day. It's, the negatives far outweigh, the positives. Sometimes the movies glamorize it a little bit too much. And most all of them at least have that message that it's just not a life you want to go into.
Yeah, no, I don't want to live that life. And I feel like there was also a true crime series that came out based on a true story, Under the Rainbow or Under the Bridge, Rainbow Bridge or something like that. And I should have had this at the top of my head, but it's just coming to me right now. But it goes into how these girls kind of create this mafia mentality, and that's not the lifestyle you want to live.
Yeah, I was actually showing some clips on my TikTok to a friend of mine today at work, and he was just like, when you're in the streets, you got to worry about so much, and not only all those things, the police, people trying to kill you, all that, you also got to worry about your friends, because 9 times out of 10, when these guys get killed, it's the guy right behind them that was next in line that does it, because he's ready to take the reins and he's ready to be the top guy. So it's not only everybody else you got to watch your friends, because a lot of times these people, it's their friends that do it, because they're the only ones that can get close. So it's definitely a lot of treachery, and just the stories that these guys have and the things that they've done. You're not going to get that anywhere else. You might read it in a book, but just to be able to talk with some of these guys and get their stories, it's been cool. And we've had a lot of drug smugglers on there that tell how they got away with stuff. And most all of them, I want people to know this isn't glamorizing, because at the end of the day, most of them will say, like, now, at the time, yeah, I thought I was on the top of the world. Now I have nothing. It all got taken away. I had to go to prison. But a lot of times there's like rebuilding. I had this one guy named Brian O'Day, and he was just a big time smuggler. He done 75 tons of pot in 2 trips on a fishing boat. That's how they kind of camouflaged what he was doing. And he eventually went to jail. He got out, and his wife was like, say he needed to find work, legitimate work. And he was like, what do I do? All I've ever done is this. This is all I know. And she was like, well, use that. Put that on your resume. And he's like, are you crazy? Nobody's going to give me a job as a pot smuggler. He's like, no, you done logistics. You manage people. You organize transportation. You done a lot of stuff. You don't have to tell them what it was for, but you had years of experience and, this, and this. And when I thought about that, I'm like, that's actually genius, because a lot of criminals, had they done something legitimate, would probably own Fortune 500 companies.
Also, if you come to California, I think that's a legit business, except for the smuggling, but like
Yeah.
figuring out how to distribute it and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yes. And speaking of triumphs and having people on your podcast that have these incredible stories, can you share your story with me?
Yeah, sure. So I guess to kind of give a little bit of background, I grew up in a little small town called Darlington, South Carolina. Not a whole lot there. I did have a racetrack for the NASCAR, if you have any NASCAR fans, but that's about it. Very small town. And I grew up there, went to school, and then I met my wife in 2003. We actually met at a club. It was a crazy scenario. A person I went to school with happened to bump into her the week before outside. They weren't able to get in because one of their friends didn't have their ID, so they left. The next week, they come back. The friend of mine, I see the girl that I went to school with talking to the girl that would become my wife, and I'm just looking. I'm like, I've never seen her before. And so when she steps away, I go up and I'm like, all right, who was that? I've never seen her before. And she said, oh, that's my friend Felicia. We met last week. And so I'm like, all right, you got to introduce me. And, fast forward, we get together, we start dating. We eventually get married. She had a daughter when we met who was 3. So essentially I raised her. I look at her as my own daughter. And then we eventually did have a son. And in 2010, we moved up to Charleston, South Carolina. And she had a lot of things that she was struggling with. Her dad had passed away. It was really tough for her to deal with. Her and her dad were extremely close. And it was to the point to where I knew when that happened, like it was going to be difficult. It really, I mean, even to this day, it's hard. So that kind of what I would say what started it. And then I got into a really bad car wreck around 2015. I flipped my car like probably 8, 9 times. It landed upside down on another vehicle. I was lucky I didn't get hurt, but somehow or another I walked away without a scratch. And it did mess up my back, though. It gave me some back problems that I still deal with. And this is kind of important to the story later on as well. I was out of work for a period of time after that wreck. And I didn't lose the job that I had, but I lost the position that within the company. Then the position that I was put back in, it wasn't good. It wasn't as much money. So I was a little aggravated. Started drinking a little bit, so that was kind of how I dealt with that. And it just kind of became a constant argument between me and her over every little thing. She wasn't quite as outgoing after the passing of her father. I had, a lot of stuff going on, so I wanted to go out, so it was kind of a pull and tug. And then what really kind of cemented it for me was there was a friend that we had met in our neighborhood who ultimately we would get together every Friday night and hang out. This gentleman ultimately one Friday night committed suicide, and we happened to be about 2 houses down after it happened. And the crazy part is I was just with him like 20 minutes before this. I went to where my wife was at a mutual friend's house, and then we hear some screaming. We know that it's somebody needing some help. We go running down there. Ultimately, he had chose to take his own life in his home. And then what we learned, like I would have never thought this hanging out with the guy. Greatest attitude, always smiling, always laughing. What it turned out was him and his wife was having a lot of problems behind the scenes that nobody knew about. And so in my mind at that point, I'm like, is that what it comes to? Do you get so far, past that point that is that your answer? And it really scared me. It was like, I might better just, we might better end this and stay friends as opposed to, me going that route, not that I was thinking about it, but it was just like, is that what it comes to if you keep going? And so I take 100% responsibility for this. I don't put any of this on her because although we had our problems, she did not want to split up. But I thought it was the better option if we divorced. And so the deal we kind of made was like, I'll leave the house to you, I'll pay all the bills. But if you start dating, which I figured she would, my wife's an attractive woman. I said, if you start dating, then we're going to have to renegotiate. I'm going to come back in. I don't want another dude sitting on my couch watching, Netflix or nothing. You're not Netflix and chilling if I'm paying the bills. That's just how it is. And we split up in August, and I would say around October, she told me that she met somebody. And I was like, all right, well, if you did, that's cool. But you remember our deal we talked about? And in November, she moved out. I moved back in, and she began dating a gentleman. I did not know him. He wasn't from around here. He was actually from Pennsylvania. He had recently moved here, so I didn't know nothing about him. I want to say right around, this was November the 1st when that happened. I never met him. I never talked to him. I didn't really want to meet him, to tell you the truth. And we didn't really speak from probably November until around the end of Christmas, because this was going to be the first time that this had, been a thing with the kids. And so we were talking, trying to figure out what we were going to do as far as visitation, who was going to get who, when we was going to do it. And we kind of just talked for the first time in a couple of months. And you could tell there was still a little something there, but I don't think it was something that we were like, oh my God, let's get back together. It wasn't that bad because we had already started the divorce proceedings. Like when she moved into the house with him, we were able to go ahead and automatically do a 90-day divorce because technically that's adultery. I wasn't trying to get her for adultery. We were amicable in all the decisions we made. It was just going to allow us to get it in 90 days because at least in South Carolina, if you can prove physical abuse, drug abuse, or adultery, you can get a divorce done in 90 days. So it was just going to wait for us to put it behind us and move on. Well, we still didn't really kind of touch on that, even though I think we both kind of felt it. And then we went through Christmas, talked a little bit. I realized things weren't going great. You know, everybody has a honeymoon phase when you first get together. And then when you start to actually live with them and, you know, have to be around them all the time, everything's not as fun. And, you know, you start to find out who they really are. And I think that was kind of the issue there. And I would say around May, April, we really started kind of talking. And I'll say this, in January, he actually left, went back to Pennsylvania, come back, but he didn't move back in with them. He was staying in some provided VA housing. He was former military who was diagnosed with PTSD. So he was staying in some VA housing. So they were still kind of seeing each other, but they weren't, you know, at the level they were before. And I had someone I was talking to too, because I wasn't sure what we were going to do. And then when we both made the decision, we was like, all right, I think we're going to give this another shot. And actually what we were going to do was finish the divorce. Go through with it, get it. I was going to give her everything I agreed. And then we were going to date. We were going to start over, you know, start from scratch. And if it goes good, hey, maybe we'll get remarried. Maybe we'll just ride with it. But if it goes bad, then we're both free to go do whatever we want to do. And that was kind of the direction we were heading. This was right after spring break. And we went and spent the Easter Sunday with her mom. We told everybody what was going to happen. We was like, hey, we're getting back together. Everybody was happy. We went to the beach, seen her aunt. There's pictures of us with them on Facebook down there. When we get back, the plan was for her to tell him, you know, she was going to tell him, I was going to tell the girl I was seeing. And, you know, that was kind of how we were going to wrap it up. Well, the girl I was seeing didn't really care. It was pretty much, okay, see you. Peace sign. So yeah, that was a good future for that one, I'm sure. And he did not take it well at all. I learned all this out later. He became pretty upset, punched some holes in the wall, and left. Now, she called me after he left. She said, I'm not sure where he went. I know he's coming back because he left a dog. He has a service dog. And I was just like, well, let me know if anything happens. Let me know if you need anything. And she actually came to the house and kind of told me that what was going on. And then I was like, well, just let me know. I was like, he's going to go back over there. And she was like, you know what? He might try to mess the house up. And then I'm going to be out of a security deposit. And I was like, yeah, you might. And so she went back over there for that. And then I never heard from her for a long period of time. Matter of fact, it was actually very late by the time I actually heard from her. Now, I knew that he had gotten the news. I knew he wasn't happy, but I still never really got an update. The same friend who I was with that we ran down where my buddy had committed suicide, he knew what was going on. And he gives me a call and was like, hey, you know, are you home? And I was like, no, I'm not home. I'm at a friend's house. And he said, well, if you ride by here and you see, the gentleman's name was Liam, he said, and you see Liam's car here, don't stop. And I'm like, all right. And he's like, I'm not sure what's going on, but he's upset. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Well, I kind of knew. I'm like, well, I got a pretty good idea why he's upset, but you know, I won't stop. I ain't going to cause any problems at your place. Well, what had happened was when he come back, he broke my wife's phone. So she had no way of communicating with me. He was forcing her to ride around the neighborhood and look for me. Now we kind of all live in one big subdivision or one big neighborhood. There's just different subdivisions within the neighborhood. So they live like two behind me. I was at one in the front, but I mean, it's like driving time's like 5 minutes. You'll be in those neighborhoods. He was making her ride around to look for me. And so they pulled up to that house. He knew that me and that guy were friends. And so when the guy walks up to the car, and he knew the situation as well. I mean, he knew he was, and he said, you know, what's up? You know, what y'all up to tonight? And he said, some people call me Chip. And he says, oh, I'm looking for Chip because when I find him, I'm gonna fucking kill him. And so he's just kind of at that point taken back. And he said he could tell that my wife looked a little upset and said, he was like, whoa, he's like, just come, you know, we can talk about it. He's like, come in here and we'll talk about it. And he said, yeah, I'll do that. He said, maybe Chip will come over here. And so he goes home. My wife drives him home. He drives his car back over there. That's when he called me and told me, he was like, hey, if you see his car here, don't stop. He called me in the middle of that. So I don't hear anything from them. And I finally hear from my wife at like 11:30. That's my daughter had gotten off work. She went home. My wife used her phone to call me and told me, she was like, yeah, he broke my phone. She was like, we were riding. He wanted me to look for you. We were riding around. He seen Jamie and he went to Jamie's house. Excuse me. And that's where he was at. And so I'm like, well, if he's out of the house, I'm good with that. You know, I ain't got to worry about you guys. So around 1 a.m., I get a text from him. And he's like, are you up? And I said, yeah, I'm up. And he said, look, he said, I just want to ask you some questions. He said, I don't want to fight. I don't want no drama, no BS. He said, I think you'll be honest with me. And he's like, we can do it at your buddy's house. The guy's name was Jamie. He said, we can do it at Jamie's house if you're comfortable with it. He's like, but I just need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. Now, Jamie's house to my house is maybe 8 houses, but it was a little chilly, so I didn't want to walk. I drove. Now, when I got up, got dressed. When I go out of the house, I live in the South. You know, I'm a big proponent of guns. I've had a CWP for years. I had a number of guns in the house. When you go out, it's wallet, keys, sunglasses, if it's daytime, and gun. It's just like part of the outfit. So yes, when I walked out, I grabbed a gun, put it on my hip, walked out. I go down there, and basically what he was wanting to know, had we been seeing each other kind of behind his back? You know, had he been, being deceived or whatever? And I told him, I was like, to be honest with you, it's really none of your business. Like, that's still my wife at the end of the day. But to answer your question, no. And he didn't believe me. I don't know if he wanted me to go down there and like be combative or whatever, but I was basically denying it, because I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. If he's got to go back over there, I don't want to upset him. I just said, look, dude, we got kids, we're going to get back together. It is what it is. When you catch somebody fresh out of a relationship, you got to know that this is a possibility, that they're going to get back together. That's how I've been the rebound guy a bunch in my day. I know how it is. And, it started off a little heated, but then strangely, it just kind of wound up being 3 dudes in a garage, just under weird circumstances, but that's kind of what it became. And this was probably around 12, like I said, 12:31. Fast forward to about 3:30, 4 o'clock. My buddy's like, look, I'm going to bed. And he had actually went and picked him up and brought him over there. So the guy didn't have his car anymore. So when we got ready to leave, he's like, are you going to stay here? And Liam was like, no, I'm going to just have him run me home. So he kind of looks at me and he's like, you cool with that? I'm like, yeah, because everything was good at that. I mean, hours that went by, nothing was said, no animosity. And I was like, yeah, I'm cool with that. So he shuts the garage. We get in the car. And he said, if I go back over there, we're probably just going to start arguing. I was like, well, I lived with her for a long time. I know how she can be. And we're almost laughing about the situation. He's like, man, you cool if we just go to your house for a little bit? He's like, I just don't want to go back over there. And like, I second guessed it for a minute, but I was just like, at least if he's with me, he's not over there and they're not arguing around the kids. So I did. I drove back to my house. Like I said, only like 7 houses down. I pull up in the driveway and he starts to tell me this story about a bracelet that he's wearing. And he's like tearing up as he's telling this story. I'm seeing tears run down this guy's face. And he tells me this story. He was in combat with a gentleman. He got shot in the head. He was doing what he thought he had to do to save him. Turns out it wasn't the proper way. That's why he got kicked out of the Army. That's why he's got PTSD. That's why he's on all of his meds. And he's telling me this story. I don't know if it was to combat the story about the guy with the suicide, because that had gotten brought up in the garage. But what actually happened was he was intelligence. He told this guy where to go. When that guy went, he actually did get shot in the head. It did kill him. That was why he got kicked out of the Army. But the way he told the story was like they was together in combat. So it wasn't 100% accurate. I'm sure it still bothered him. I know it bothered him because he wasn't faking in that car. But at that point, any guard that I had against him was like completely down. Because when a man cries in front of another man, that's about as vulnerable as you're going to get in this day and time. Like, we're men. We try not to cry. We don't cry very much. If we do, it's usually in private, maybe with our wife. We don't cry in front of other men. It's just not what we do, especially, under those circumstances. And so I felt completely comfortable at that point in time going into the house. We went into the house for probably an hour or so. Everything was fine. We're talking about his kids, my kids, our situation. We're laughing about the situation. It was an odd conversation because I'd never been in a situation like that before, but it wasn't tense in no shape or form. And we get on the subject of tattoos, and I have a tattoo right here on my chest. And when I showed him that tattoo, I don't know if you can see it by the camera, but I have a scar right here. It's from open heart surgery. And so he sees this scar, and he was like, man, what happened there? And I said, I had open heart surgery in high school. So he lifts up my shirt from the bottom and pulls it up to see the whole scar. And he was like, wow. Now, when he does this, there's no way he didn't see the gun that's on my hip, because when we got back home, I don't have any bedrooms in my house or on the downstairs floor. Everything is upstairs. The downstairs is just living room, office where I now do the podcast, and then the kitchen and the living room. All the bedrooms are upstairs. So I never went upstairs to take it off, so it was still on me the entire time. Now, if he sees it, he doesn't mention it. He doesn't say a thing. And he even says after that, he's like, under different circumstances, he said, you and I would have probably been really good friends. And he kind of gives me this bear hug, and picks me up, which again, I thought was a little odd, but a lot of times drunk people do that. I mean, they'll pick, and put you back down. He sits me right back down immediately. And he's like, where's your bathroom? So I show him the bathroom. And at this point, I haven't texted my wife in a long time to give her any kind of update about what we're doing. So he goes to the bathroom. I kind of reach over, grab the phone, and just give her a quick text. And I'm like, hey, everything's good. Just checking in. Everything's cool. I'm standing with my back to the stove in the kitchen. Now, my kitchen's kind of like rectangular shape. So you have the stove, refrigerator here, and then a sink here. And that's it. It's not very wide. I'm standing with my back to the stove, just kind of waiting on him to come out. And he comes out of that kitchen, or out of the bathroom, straight into the kitchen, and boom, hand up under my neck. It was so hard, it lifted me up off my feet, and I was actually sitting on the stove. It was like a flat top stove. And so I'm trying to get off. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Like, I don't know if he's playing after what he just did a minute ago. I don't know what's going on. I managed to slide off and get back on the floor. And I was just like, what are you doing? And he's looking me dead in my eyes. And his eyes, I swear, they were like a gray color. I've never seen eye color like that. And he looks me dead in my eyes and he said, I'm going to fucking kill you. And I told him, I was like, bro, if you don't get off me, I'm going to fucking shoot you. He cocks back his hand. I can see it coming. He's holding me like this. It's not so much of a choke, more of just kind of trying to control me, pushing my head up to force me to go back. And I see it coming. And as he's about to hit, I kind of lift up a little bit and he clipped the bottom of my chin. So he didn't hit me like in the face. He kind of hit me like bam right there. And his momentum kind of carried him like that. So he let go. When he let go, I took a step back, I drew out my gun and I shot. It was just the heat of the moment. It sounded like it was 2 shots. I found out later it was actually 3. He immediately dropped, and then I immediately called 911. And there's a 911 tape that I can actually send you if you want to insert parts of it. And I was just told him, I was like, look, I had a guy in my house, we were getting along. He attacked me, I had to shoot him. And I was on the phone with them what seemed like forever. A first cop come, he put me in cuffs, but he didn't say you're under arrest. He was just like, I got to figure out the situation. So he put me in the car, and this, you got to imagine, like every minute seems like an hour. Every 10 minutes seems like a day. It was just, time was dragging. I'm in there. I don't know what's going on. I see the ambulance pull up. I see him take him out on the ambulance. Nobody's coming to talk to me. Finally, a cop comes and says I'm being placed under arrest. Asked me if I want to answer any questions. I said, no, not without a lawyer. Because at that point now I'm worried. I'm still in the car another 3-4 hours. Now, by this time it's 6, 7 in the morning. Neighbors are coming out. People are getting ready to go to church. This started Saturday night. It's now into Sunday morning. People are riding by. They're seeing me in the back of the cop car. They don't know what's going on. Everybody's looking out the blinds, riding up on golf carts. People are just parked watching. And finally, I just told one of the cops when they were coming by, I motioned for him. I said, man, I got to go to the bathroom. And he's like, nah, you can't go. I was like, no, I'm going to go. It's just a matter of where. Like, I got to. I was like, I can go in the yard, but I got to go. And he let me out. They took me in the house. And they took all my clothes except for my underwear. They took my boots, my pants, my shirt, everything I was wearing. I changed clothes. And I think I'm going back to the car because they told me I'm under arrest. And he's like, is there somewhere you can go and hang out while we finish our investigation? So at that point, I'm feeling a little better because I'm thinking, all right, maybe they're starting to piece together what happened. Maybe they've talked to some people. I don't know who they've talked to. Now, I go to a buddy's house around the corner. I'm there about 2 hours, hour and a half-ish, somewhere along in there. A detective comes riding by. I go up and I'm like, so where we at? And he's like, you can go back home. He's like, we're done with everything. And I said, well, is there a mess? Do y'all have to clean up? And he said, we don't do that. He said, that's on you. He's like, we don't have any responsibility for cleanup. And he was like, when are you going to come in and answer some questions? I said, well, I'm not going to come without a lawyer. At the time, all I had was a divorce lawyer. He happened to be a former cop, so that guy knew him. And he's like, well, I know him. He's like, we'll set up a time for you to come and talk, and we'll go from there. So I'm like, okay. I go back home. There was nothing. My mom had actually got the news. She had come home. She said she got all the blood that was there up with a paper towel. Or I think she said 2 paper towels. It just wasn't a lot of blood. A lot of that has to do with the gun and the caliber of bullets. This was a 9mm. They were full metal jacket rounds. They weren't like hollow points. All the shots were center mass in the chest. There was nothing in the head or anywhere else. So you're just not going to really get, it's not like you see in the movies, when you see blood fly everywhere. It just wasn't that kind of scene. So at this point, I'm actually feeling kind of good about the situation. Not in the sense of I'm happy what happened, just I understand that I don't think they're going to arrest me. They've kind of pieced together what happened. Well, we go the next day. I give my statement. I think everything's good. He actually don't even want me to go to the police station. He says, I told them to send me their questions. I'm going to take your statement. If they need anything else, I'll let you know. And he calls me and he's like, hey, everything they want to know, you answered in your statement. We're good. I'm like, okay, this was Monday. Tuesday, I get a call from the lawyer and he says, hey, I got some bad news. Now, that's not a phrase you want to hear from your lawyer in a situation like this. And he says, they're charging you with murder. And I was like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. I was like, why? I was like, well, on what grounds? Like, what are they doing it for? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know if they're trying to paint you as like a jealous husband or what it is, but you got to turn yourself in tomorrow at 12 o'clock or they're going to come get you. And so I'm just like, I'll call you back. So I hang up on him. I start trying to make calls, figure out who's the best criminal lawyer to get. They tell me a guy named Andy Savage. That was just the name that kept coming up. So I called, left a message. His secretary was like, can you be here tomorrow at 2 o'clock? And I'm like, I'm supposed to be in jail at 2 o'clock. Like, we're going to have to do this early. And we went early in the morning. I told him the story, and he looked at me, and he was like, it doesn't make sense. He's like, I don't understand why we're doing this. I'm like, well, that makes 2 of us. And he said, I've got the best people that you can find. I've got the best forensics people. I've got the best investigators. He's like, if you're not being truthful with me, we're going to find out. He said, but if you are being truthful, then we're going to get you in the clear of this because you shouldn't be charged. And I said, well, I promise you, I'm telling you the truth. And so we kind of went with that. I wound up having to turn myself in Sunday. Now, the following Sunday. So they wanted me to turn myself in Wednesday. He got it pushed. He got it pushed to Friday, then eventually extended to Sunday. And I don't want to say we had a party, but it was like a lot of my family come down, a lot of people. We ate at the house. We hung out. It was definitely not a party, but it was a gathering because nobody knew what was going to happen. A lot of times people don't get bond for murder. So there wasn't a guarantee I was even getting out. And so I go in. Luckily, the circuit court was in my in my county because to get seen and get bond for my charge, it has to be done by the circuit court. That rotates from county to county to county. They happened to be in Berkeley County when I was there. So I caught a break. We went to bond court. I've never been arrested for anything. So all this was new to me. I'm getting, carted into the courtroom, wrists handcuffed together, linked down to my ankles, handcuffed together. I'm having to, shimmy in there and stand in front of this gigantic courtroom and hear the state say why I'm a danger to society and need to be locked up. And my lawyer saying I need to be let out. The judge didn't even give a final ruling. She hit the gavel and she was like, I'll make my decision and let you know. And before I could even look at my lawyer, be like, what the hell does that mean? They're carting me off to the back to let the next people come in there. I found out a couple hours later they did give me bond. It just probably wasn't going to happen till the next day. So I wound up having to stay another night in jail. I got moved to Gen Pop that night. That was a whole nother experience. Like, I guess I am heavily tattooed. So they might have thought I'd been there before. They were like, you know how to work the showers, right? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I know. I didn't know how. I went in there and it's like some little piece of plastic you're supposed to lodge in there because when you press the button, it only lasts like 3 seconds and then it cuts off. And I guess there's a way you pry it in there and you keep it open. I didn't know how to work it, but I wasn't going to tell them that. But it was actually, it wasn't bad, man. I tell everybody, like, everybody should get locked up one time. Nothing serious. Just go experience it. Here's some of the stories in there. Now it's nowhere I wanted to spend an extensive amount of time, but just to hear some of the stories in there, it was like, a lot of them were being positive. They were like, when I get out, I'm gonna start a landscaping business because I know I can't get that with my record. And, I know a guy that did it and he's making a killing. So it was a lot of positivity in there. I get out and the next kind of mode is, all right, well, I haven't been fired. I still got a job. That's a good thing, until I went to my job and they fired me. So now I'm being charged with murder. They're looking at giving me 25 to life. I just got fired. So now it's like one tumbling brick after another. I don't even have time to deal with the fact that I shot somebody, because right after that, I'm being charged with it. Then I'm being fired. The only blessing about me being fired was they gave me I could have access to my 401k. I drew out my 401k, paid off a few credit cards, paid off my car, paid the lawyer in full, which was around $60,000 at the time for him just to take the case. It was $50,000 to take it, $10,000 for retainer to start doing all the work. So I paid him up front. Had I not had that money, I'd have been in trouble, or I'd still be making payments to this day. And basically that was kind of it. I mean, we had a preliminary hearing, and the detective just got tore apart in the preliminary hearing. The judge almost tossed it. She was very close. She even said at the end, she said, I don't see a lot here, but given the situation, I'll bind it to trial, which we kind of figured that was going to happen. Like, there's that saying that they'll indict a ham sandwich. Anybody can get indicted. We kind of figured it was going to get bound to trial. So what we're doing at that point was we're planning on a self-defense plea on the castle law and self-defense. So it's not a trial. We do that before the trial. And if we win that, then we're good. We don't have to worry about going to trial. And also it protects me civilly, because, OJ got found not guilty, but then later on he went to civil court and got found guilty. So if you win with the self-defense plea, you're good. So that was what we were looking at. And then COVID happened. So it pushes everything back. That's around the time I started the podcast. Then the prosecutor changed. So the prosecutor that was over my case left. It was a while before they appointed a new one. That person come in, stayed for 3 months. They left. Then finally they got one in there that looked like he was going to be there for a while. The podcast actually had me going to New York a few times. Now keep in mind, I don't have an anklet on. I never had an anklet. They never gave me one. Even though I'm on bond for murder, I was on house arrest. I could only go to work, doctor's visits, lawyer's visits, church, and my son's sporting events. That was the only thing I was allowed to go to. Well, when I told him, I'm like, look, this is work. Like, I do make money from it. It's not a lot, but I make money from it. I was like, I need to go to New York. They let me go. Then about 2 months later, they let me go again. And my lawyer's like, look, he's like, I got an idea. He said, it's risky, but he said, I want to call a meeting with the prosecutor, show him everything we have, lay it out. And he said, I think it's so good and so powerful that they will either drop it or they will just say, okay, we'll agree to the self-defense. And I was like, he's like, but the downside of that is they know everything we have. So they can say, wow, this is weak. We can fight them. And I'm like, let's do it. So we have our forensics guy basically lays out and punches holes in every reason why they charged me. So they said that, I said there was a struggle, but there was no signs of a struggle. So he takes the first arriving officer's body cam footage and zooms in on a knocked over shot glass on the floor. He zooms in on a knocked over glass, like a, whiskey glass on the counter. So he's like, these kind of look indicative to a struggle. There's stuff on the floor being knocked over. And they said they didn't believe that I was in close proximity to him because I had on a long sleeve white shirt and I had no blood on me. Well, the thing is, there was no blood nowhere. And he was wearing 3 shirts. He had on a t-shirt, a long sleeve shirt, and then another shirt that's kind of like the Wiccan material, like an Under Armour type thing. So a bullet's not going to transfer blood back out through 3 layers of clothes on me. And so that was kind of the second reason. So he was like, look, that's just not going to happen. You're not going to get transfer with this type of weapon, this type of ammo through all these layers of clothes. It's just not going to be there. And he said, to further the point, when the bullets went through him, one of them hit the refrigerator door and ricocheted and hit a wall. The other one hit a 24 pack of water that was beside the refrigerator. So these bullets had a chance to V. Had he been further back and I shot him from a distance, they would have hit almost simultaneously. They had a chance to V because he was close to me, and then they V'd out afterwards. Actually, the bullet that went into the water, they didn't even find. I found it after I got out of jail. I had to call them, tell them we found it, and they had to come out and take it and put it in evidence. The detective was not very thorough on this case at all. So we lay all this out. We show it to him. The prosecutor comes to my house. I never got rid of that refrigerator. I kept it. I had a feeling it would come into play. So he sees the refrigerator. He sees the dents. I never covered up the mark on the wall where the bullet ricocheted. He seen that. We stood there. I let him hold that knocked over rocks glass in his hand. I could tell, show him how heavy it was. I laid out the whole scenario of everything that happened, much like I've told you here in this episode. And he could really take it in. Like, you could tell he was listening. He wasn't just there to be there. And, we had a short conversation. He leaves. My lawyer's like, I think it went good. We'll wait for, see what they say. We didn't hear anything for a while. That was in, I want to say, August, 1st of August. September went by. October almost went by. Right before Halloween, I'm at work. I'm not uncommon to get a phone call from my lawyer. And I actually had the flu. I didn't realize it at the time. I was sick. And he called me and he's like, how you doing? I'm like, honestly, I'm sick, man. I'm not really feeling too good. He said, well, I got some news going to make you feel better. He said, how does it feel to be a free man? And when he said that, like, I just dropped to my knees. I was crying. I say that guys don't cry in front of guys. I was crying in front of everybody that day. I mean, it was, and everybody that I worked with at the time there knew the situation. They knew what I was going through. It wasn't a secret. And so everybody was really happy for me. I was able to call my mom and, that was a load off her, call my dad, tell him. It was just an unbelievable feeling to finally have that weight lifted off you. Cause I tell people, like, I only can relate it to, like, going to the doctor and finding out if you got terminal cancer. And they're like, all right, I'll call you back and let you know. And you never get a phone call for 5 years. That's a heavy weight to carry. I mean, it bogs you down. You can't even enjoy a good event. Right after it was over, I did get permission to go to my daughter's graduation, but I had to come straight home. Couldn't do anything. And I'm just like, God, am I going to get to see my son graduate? So you can't enjoy one event without thinking if the next one's ever going to be there. Is this my last Christmas home? This is my last Thanksgiving, birthday, whatever the case may be. So it was like I couldn't even allow myself to enjoy life. Now, granted, I'm glad I wasn't in jail. A lot of people don't get bond. A lot of people are in there and some people never get out. Some people do years and are innocent. So I was very fortunate, but at the same time, it still was like a mental prison. And when that phone call came, I can't, Tara, I can't even begin to put it into words how good it felt. And it was just like the culmination of everything that we had been through. I had been ridiculed in the neighborhood. My son had been subjected to it, my daughter, my wife, and it was just like, finally, it's over. And it was an amazing feeling.
Wow. Wow. I have so many questions. I feel like this episode might need to be a two-parter where I have to have you come back.
Absolutely.
Because there's just so many things that we could get into with, like, how you healed afterwards, what you went through even afterwards with having to process everything, what your kids even went through. And I also, something I pondered upon for a while is, like, how did this happen fully? And so I want to even ask you questions like, did that ponder upon your mind a lot? Like, how did this fully happen? Like, how did he get to the place where it switched so fast?
I've asked myself that a lot of times, and like I've come up with a bunch of different scenarios. One is like, I think, my wife had told him they were splitting up. He had no family here. When he went home in January, his parents allegedly told him that they didn't want him there because he had been prone to violent outbursts. So they sent him back. So it could have been a situation, you've heard the term suicide by cop, where someone wants to die, so they just charge at a cop, the cop shoots them, and it's their way of not killing themselves, but ending. I don't know if that was a portion of it. Maybe he seen the gun. He knew if I was put in a position to do it, I would do it. He didn't know me that well. I mean, I didn't even know if I could do that. If you'd asked me, 2 or 3 years back, hey, do you think you'll ever shoot somebody? My answer would be no. Like, not unless it's somebody breaking in my house or something. And I thought maybe when he picked me up, that was him testing, seeing if like, all right, I can handle this dude. I can force him around a little bit. So I don't know. I've wondered that so many times, and I don't know if he was actually legit trying to kill me. I don't know if he wanted me to kill him. I've thought about like had he did get me, and it work out the other way. At that point, what do you think he would have did? He'd have went back to where my wife and kids were, probably killed all them, then himself, and then it turns into a murder suicide. So, you know, there wasn't a good ending any way you cut it, but I'm happy with the way it worked out because I've never looked at it as I killed somebody. I've looked at it as I survived somebody trying to kill me. And if he hadn't attacked me, this would not have happened. He would have walked out of that kitchen the same way he walked in it. So I can't answer that fully, but I've definitely pondered that a bunch of how it got there.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting because, like, I just went through a breakup, and you're telling me the story of how he went back. He broke her phone. He was with her for kind of hours. There wasn't like this letting like her really like go in a sense. And for me, I have a lot of PTSD. I have, a combatic, and it's not the same as being in war as all. I'm not going to claim that,
Right.
But
It's a different kind.
yeah, but here's the thing. I didn't go to my ex and was like begging him and having conversations and breaking things. Like that to me is definitely a dangerous situation for your ex-wife.
Hmm. Well, it's actually it's still wife. We never got
Wife? Oh
divorced and we
yeah.
stayed together. Yeah. So when everything happened, obviously I wasn't going to fork out any more money to finish out this divorce. So everything got kind of devoted to the case. So we just cut that off and ended that, and we're still together. We made it through all this. It's not been easy. She carried a lot of guilt for a lot of things. She blamed herself for a lot of it. And I tried to tell her, look, people break up and get back together all the time. Jennifer Lopez just then it might be broke up again, but she just got back together with Ben Affleck. And when she left Derek Jeter to go back to Ben Affleck, Jeter didn't come to Ben's house with a baseball bat and try to beat his head in. I mean, people do this. That's life. People break up and get back together all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's good. Sometimes you need a break. Go out, see what's out there. You realize, hey, I kind of had it good where we are. And he was a very narcissistic gentleman. My lawyers had to interview a lot of people, and they interviewed his actual current wife that he refused to get a divorce from. My wife didn't even know he was married. She knew he had kids from an ex-wife. She had no idea that he was still married until much, much later in their relationship. And the woman gave a lot of testimony to the fact that he was very narcissistic. He was going to be the one to win any situation. And, that may have lended itself to why, everything happened the way it did that night, because he didn't necessarily have to get with me to ask me those questions. I can't even think he would thought I would tell him the truth, even if he did answer it.
I think how you responded to him with those questions was appropriate given the circumstance of everything. And I'm really sorry that you went through this and where you had to be put in the position where you had to take a life.
Yes, nobody, I don't think, ever thinks that they're going to be put in that position. Even people that go and get a CWP like I did, you have it for protection. Worst case scenarios, break-ins, robberies, something like that. You don't ever think that something like this would escalate into that. And then a lot of people don't even know if they're capable of doing it. A lot of people say, I would do this, I would do that. You don't really know what you would do until you're in those situations. And, luckily everything I done was within the confines of the law. Self-defense is very tricky. You can't start an argument or a fight. Just say if there was another girl, you started beating up on another girl, then that other girl started getting the better of you. You can't pull out a gun and use it because you were getting beat up, because you were the aggressor. You lose all rights to that. Once he went down, I couldn't go up and put 3 more bullets in him. Everybody's always like, oh, I'd unloaded a clip on him. Once the threat is eliminated, you have to stop because there's no more threat to your life. So if I'd have walked up to him while he was on the ground and pumped 3 more shots in him, that's murder, because at that point, he's no longer a threat to me. So all those things are not things you necessarily think about in the heat of it, but you kind of have to know the rules in the background of your mind. And everything I'd done was in the confines of the law. All the forensics backed up the story. So it was, I was in a unique position where I didn't have to lie about anything. I didn't have to stretch the truth or fudge the truth. Like everything happened just like I said it did. It's just unfortunate it took almost $100,000 in 5 years for that to come to light.
Yeah, no, wow. It's just, you really don't think that you're ever going to be in that moment unless you have like premonitions and you're like, this person's
Yeah.
stalking me and coming after me. But this wasn't, you seem completely healthy in your view of like relationships and like, you know, ending it and getting back together. Like, I just think that this person, unfortunately, you know, got what they were trying to do to you.
Yeah. I mean, and another thing I go back to is like that look that was in his eyes. I've never seen like that kind of rage in anybody before. I've been in, fights with people before. Obviously, nobody's going to be smiling if they're trying to knock your block off, but this was just different. It was like he wasn't there, and whatever there was there had one intention, and it was trying to kill me. And I knew when we locked up, like in my, it was a short amount of time, but it was crazy because when I look back, I thought about so much in that short amount of time. And in my head, I thought like one of us isn't going to leave this kitchen. Like
Yeah.
once he had his hands on me and he was swinging and he told me he was going to kill me. Like I didn't know this guy. I'd never hung out with him before, so I got to take him at his word. And I knew that unfortunately one of us was probably not going to walk out of that kitchen.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so happy you're here. And I'm so sorry for all this, all the bullshit you went through. Um, it wasn't fair. And especially in the states that you live in, I feel like it should have been handled differently with the laws there.
Yeah, definitely. Like if I lived in New York, I could understand New York is very strict on their gun laws. It's a lot different. But I mean, I'm in the South and I'm in a gun friendly state. I'm where the castle doctrine is a thing. The castle doctrine protects you in your home, in your car, and in your place of business. You have your right to defend yourself in those three places up into and including deadly force. And it's like if you're not able to defend yourself in your own home against somebody that's trying to kill you, then where are you able to defend yourself? And I wasn't like the whole narrative of me trying to take him out because I was a jealous husband. We had been split up for months. Like I can understand if this happened a week after they had been together. I can see where they were like, he was, upset. This was months later. And this wasn't me being mad that they were together. It was me getting my wife back. Like we were getting back together. They had the motive right. They just had it on the wrong person.
Yeah.
They had, upset, mad, jealous, angry. They just had it on the wrong guy. And that in itself is like a whole nother ordeal. That detective wound up catching a lot of heat for missing that bullet. She got demoted to property crimes. Then later on, she got demoted, and her current role is a school resource officer at a local elementary school. So that's a big fall from grace from detective all the way down to that. And which is that might be too much of an important job for her to have, to be quite honest, but that's where she's at now. So that just lets you know the caliber of intelligence that I had working this case.
Yeah. Did she ever write an apology or anything?
I've
No.
never heard a thing from her. I haven't gotten an apology from anybody, to be honest with you. When they dropped it, part of my bond was I couldn't have any weapons. So the weapons that I owned that weren't used, my lawyer had them. I went and got all them back, got them back in my home because I wasn't able to have anything in my home if, God forbid, there was a break-in or a robbery. So I got those back. And then probably about a month later, I went to the police station and they give me back everything that they had taken. So my clothes, my gun, for whatever reason, they took a computer that I had just bought. I think I paid like $600 for it. It was a brand new computer. I hadn't had it a week, and they took it. Of course, now it's obsolete. But I got back that. It wasn't much, but I did get the gun back that was used. But I mean, like even in that, there wasn't any apology. There wasn't anything, and I haven't gotten anything from anybody. I don't expect to. really. I did have one news reporter reach out and wanted to cover the release, and I said, well, if they're going to cover it anyway, then I'd at least rather take part in it. That way I can, give my part of it. And they did, and I appreciated them for doing that. But like they cover it when it happens, but then when it gets dropped, the interest is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so true. Well, I'm going to definitely have you back, but for now, let's get into the Patreon part and talk about like how it was to recover after everything. Did you have to go through therapy? What were your healing modalities in that? Thank you for listening to this episode of Tara's Baddies Club. We're going to definitely have Hollywood Wade come back because his story is so interesting and I feel like there's so much more we could get into. But if you need more content, join the Patreon. There is literally always content on there. Even if I'm not the best at the podcast, there will always be content on the Patreon being put out. And so join over there. It really helps in supporting the podcast. And then if you feel like giving us a 5-star review, that is helpful in growing the podcast and getting these stories out there. And until next time, I'm Tara Newell.